Airport staff tosses black teen's luggage, unaware he just bought the airline for 120 May. Thomas Reed stepped into Heathrow Airport on a rainy Tuesday morning. At 19, he looked like any other teenager in his worn jeans and navy jumper. His curly brown hair stuck out from under a plain cap, and his worn backpack hung from one shoulder. But Thomas was different. He carried himself with quiet confidence as he joined the check-in queue for first class. "Next, please," called the attendant Olivia, with a warm smile that quickly faded when she saw Thomas. She glanced at his simple clothes with raised eyebrows. "First class to Edinburgh," Thomas said, sliding his passport across the counter. Olivia checked his details twice. "Right. May I see proof of payment?" Thomas produced his phone, showing the confirmation. Nearby, a grey-haired businessman in a suit received no such questions. "Very well," Olivia said stiffly, printing his boarding pass. "Gate 14. William will handle your luggage." William, a stocky baggage handler with thinning blonde hair, was chatting with a colleague when Thomas approached. "Good morning," Thomas said. "This needs careful handling, please. There's fragile equipment inside." William barely looked at the suitcase. "First time flying posh, eh? These cheap bags don't belong in first class." Before Thomas could respond, William tossed his suitcase roughly onto the belt. It tumbled onto its side, making Thomas wince. The same William then carefully placed an elegant leather suitcase from the businessman behind Thomas. "Have a pleasant flight, sir," William told the older man with a respectful nod. Thomas stood still, feeling eyes on him from other passengers. A security guard named Peter watched the scene unfold, but said nothing. Two other staff members, Emma and Jack, turned away, pretending not to notice. Taking a deep breath, Thomas remembered his father's words from yesterday. "Watch carefully, son. People show their true character when they think no one important is looking." Robert Reed had grown up in council housing in Liverpool. Through hard work and brilliant ideas, he had built Reed Technologies, now worth billions. Unlike many wealthy people, Robert never forgot his roots. He taught Thomas to value character over money. What the airport staff didn't know was that Reed Technologies had been in talks to buy struggling Britannia Airways for months. The airline was facing bankruptcy after years of poor management and falling customer satisfaction. Robert had sent Thomas to experience the airline's service firsthand before making the final decision. "Don't tell them who you are," Robert had instructed. "I want to know how they treat ordinary people, not just those they think have money or influence." Thomas walked through security, feeling the weight of responsibility on his young shoulders. At only 19, he was already his father's most trusted advisor. He had a natural talent for spotting problems in businesses and finding solutions. 3 of his suggestions had already saved Reed Technologies millions. In the first-class lounge, Thomas sat quietly in a corner, watching. He noticed how staff fawned over older, well-dressed passengers while giving him suspicious glances. Lounge attendant named George checked his boarding pass twice before reluctantly allowing him entry. Only one staff member, a kind-faced woman named Mary, treated everyone equally. When Thomas dropped his magazine, she picked it up with a warm smile. "Here you go, love. First time flying with us?" she asked. "Yes," Thomas replied honestly. "Well, I hope it won't be your last," Mary said sincerely. "Can I get you anything else?" This simple kindness stood out sharply against the background of cold stares and whispered comments. As boarding began, Thomas made mental notes about everything he observed. His father had trusted him with this important task. The future of Britannia. Airways and its 5,000 employees would be influenced by what he reported back. The damaged prototype in his suitcase would have to wait. It was an efficiency system that could have saved the airline millions in fuel costs. Thomas had planned to offer it as part of the purchase deal. "Now boarding first class for flight BA218 to Edinburgh," announced a voice over the speakers. Thomas stood, squared his shoulders and headed toward the gate. He was no longer just Thomas Reed, teenager. He was the eyes and ears of Reed Technologies, about to make a decision that would change many lives forever. He boarded the plane with a clear purpose in mind, to see if this airline deserved a second chance. Airport staff tosses black teen's luggage, unaware he just bought the airline for 120. Thomas settled into his window seat in first class, feeling the plush leather against his back. The cabin smelled of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. He opened his notebook and began taking notes about his experience. Flight attendant Emma moved through the cabin with practiced grace. She stopped beside James Thompson, a grey-haired man in a tailored suit sitting across the aisle. "Good morning, sir. Would you like anything to drink before takeoff?" Emma asked with a bright smile that reached her eyes. "Sparkling water with lemon, please," James replied, without looking up from his newspaper. "Right away, sir." Emma nodded. Respectfully, when she turned to Thomas, her smile disappeared. She looked at his seat number twice. "And you?" Her tone was flat, almost cold. "Orange juice, please," Thomas said politely. Emma gave a tight nod and moved on without another word. Thomas wrote in his notebook, "Different treatment based on appearance." The businessman received his drink in a real glass. Thomas got his orange juice in a plastic cup, though all first-class passengers should receive the same service. Thomas sipped his juice slowly, watching the airport workers load luggage into the plane. He thought about his father's journey. Robert Reed had grown up in a small flat in Liverpool with 5 siblings. He started fixing computers at 12 and built his first program at 15. Through hard work and clever ideas, he turned a small repair shop into Reed Technologies, now worth billions. "Money doesn't make a gentleman, kindness does," Robert always said. These words guided both father and son. A different flight attendant approached, Mary, the kind woman from the lounge. She had warm brown eyes and grey streaks in her hair. "Is everything all right with your juice?" she asked Thomas. "Yes, thank you." Thomas dropped his magazine while reaching for his drink. Mary quickly bent down to pick it up. "Here you go, love. First time flying with us?" "Yes, it is," Thomas answered truthfully. "Well, I hope we're making a good impression," Mary said with genuine warmth. Thomas smiled back. "Some more than others." Mary lowered her voice. "Don't mind Emma. She's had a hard time lately with her mum being ill." Thomas nodded, appreciating Mary's kindness, but noting she didn't excuse poor service. He glanced at her name badge, Mary Wilson, Senior Cabin Crew. He made another note in his book. As the plane took off, Thomas looked out the window at London growing smaller below. His father had trusted him with this important task. At 19, most people his age were starting university or first jobs. Thomas was helping decide the fate of an airline with thousands of employees. He thought about Britannia Airways' problems. Once a proud British company, it now struggled with old planes, unhappy staff, and falling customer numbers. Reed Technologies could save it, but only if the company was worth saving. Throughout the flight, Thomas observed everything. Emma continued treating well-dressed passengers better than others. The food cart came to Thomas last. When he asked for a blanket, Emma pointed vaguely toward the back without offering to get one. Mary, however, checked on everyone equally. She remembered passengers' names and smiled genuinely at everyone. When an elderly woman needed help with her meal, Mary sat beside her for a minute, opening packages and cutting food into smaller pieces. That's how it should be, Thomas thought. As the captain announced their descent into Edinburgh, Thomas put away his notebook. He had filled 3 pages with observations. The plane touched down with a bump, tires squealing on wet tarmac. Rain streaked the windows as they taxied to the terminal. "Thank you for flying with Britannia Airways," the captain's voice announced. "The local time is 10:45 a.m., and the temperature is a chilly 8 degrees with rain." Thomas gathered his belongings, waiting his turn to exit. Mary passed by and gave him a kind smile. "I hope you enjoyed your flight, love." "I did, thanks to you," Thomas replied honestly. As passengers filed toward the exit, Thomas thought about his damaged suitcase. Would it have survived William's rough handling? Inside was the prototype efficiency system that could save Britannia Airways millions in fuel costs. The decision about buying the airline now rested partly on his shoulders. Thomas straightened his back and headed toward baggage claim, ready to complete his assessment. Airport staff tosses black teen's luggage, unaware he just bought the airline for 120 MSM. Thomas stood at the baggage carousel in Edinburgh Airport, watching suitcases slide down onto the belt. The rain outside made soft pattering sounds against the large windows. His flight from London had been quick, but he had seen enough to form strong opinions about Britannia Airways service. When his black suitcase finally appeared, Thomas immediately noticed the damage. The hard shell had a large crack running along one side. The handle was bent at an odd angle. He picked it up with a sigh, remembering how roughly William had tossed it onto the belt at Heathrow. In a quiet corner of the baggage claim area, Thomas carefully opened the damaged case. Inside, wrapped in protective foam, was his prototype, an advanced fuel efficiency system that used artificial intelligence to optimize flight paths and reduce fuel consumption. The main circuit board had snapped in two. 6 months of work ruined. Perfect, Thomas muttered, shaking his head. This prototype could have saved Britannia Airways millions of pounds in fuel costs each year. It was meant to be part of the purchase package, a goodwill gesture from Reed Technologies. Thomas carried his broken suitcase to the customer service desk. A young man named Oliver sat behind the counter, tapping away at his computer keyboard. His blue uniform shirt was wrinkled, and his name badge hung crooked. "Excuse me," Thomas said. "My luggage was damaged during the flight." Oliver barely looked up. "Fill out this form. Processing takes 6 weeks." 6 weeks? Thomas asked. "The damage happened today." "That's the policy," Oliver replied with a bored tone. "Nothing I can do about it." Thomas noticed Oliver's different behavior when an older woman in expensive clothes approached about her missing golf clubs. Oliver immediately made phone calls and assured her they would locate her bags quickly. Quietly, Thomas filled out the damage claim form. He didn't argue or reveal who he was. Instead, he observed and took mental notes. This was exactly the kind of information his father had sent him to gather. Outside the airport, Thomas stood under the shelter of the taxi rank and made a phone call. "Dad? It's me." "Thomas, how was the flight?" Robert Reed's warm voice came through the phone. "Educational," Thomas replied. "My suitcase is damaged, and the prototype inside is broken." "That's unfortunate," Robert said, "but perhaps not surprising, given the state of their operations." "Dad, I've seen enough," Thomas continued. "The technology's damaged, but I've made my decision about the staff." "Go on," his father encouraged. "Most of them treated me poorly because I look young and was dressed simply. But there was one flight attendant, Mary Wilson, who was kind to everyone. She's the type of person who should be leading their customer service, not buried in the ranks." "I see," Robert said thoughtfully. "And your overall recommendation?" "Buy the airline," Thomas said firmly. "But we need to change the culture completely." 2 weeks later, Heathrow Airport's largest conference room was packed with Britannia Airways staff. From baggage handlers to pilots, everyone had been called to an emergency meeting. The room buzzed with nervous energy. "They're going to announce redundancies," whispered Emma to another flight attendant. "My cousin works in accounting. She says we're nearly bankrupt." William, the baggage handler who had damaged Thomas's suitcase, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I've got a mortgage to pay, can't lose this job now." At exactly 10 o'clock, George Phillips, the airline's current owner, walked onto the stage. At 65, he looked tired but relieved. "Good morning, everyone," he began. "As many of you know, Britannia Airways has been facing serious financial challenges. Today I'm announcing that the airline has been purchased by Reed Technologies for $120 million. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Some people looked relieved, others worried. "I'd like to introduce you to the new owner, Mr. Robert Reed." Robert Reed walked onto the stage, tall and confident in a simple navy suit. Unlike George Phillips, he wore no tie and had rolled up his sleeves. "Thank you all for coming," Robert said, his voice carrying easily through the large room. "Britannia Airways has a proud history, but has lost its way recently. We're going to change that." The staff listened in tense silence. "I'd like to introduce the person who will be overseeing daily operations, my son, Thomas." The crowd watched as a young man walked onto the stage. Several gasps of recognition echoed through the room. William's face turned pale. Emma's mouth fell open. Oliver from customer service suddenly sat up straight. It was the teenager in jeans whose luggage they had mishandled, the boy they had dismissed and treated poorly. Thomas Reed stood center stage, looking out at the shocked faces of the Britannia Airways staff. Airport staff tosses. Black teen's luggage, unaware he just bought the airline for 120 milles. William's face turned as white as paper when he saw Thomas Reed walk onto the stage. His hands began to shake as he remembered how he had tossed the young man's suitcase and made rude comments about cheap bags. Next to him, Emma, the flight attendant, looked down at her hands, recalling how she had treated Thomas differently from other first-class passengers. Oliver from customer service shifted in his seat, remembering how he had barely looked up when Thomas reported his damaged luggage. The memory of his bored tone when saying 6 weeks processing time now made him feel sick to his stomach. The large conference room fell completely silent. You could hear a pin drop as Thomas adjusted the microphone. "Good morning," Thomas began, his voice calm but clear. "2 weeks ago I traveled on one of your flights as a normal passenger. I dressed in simple clothes and carried an ordinary suitcase." He paused, letting his words sink in. "Some of you treated me poorly because I didn't look wealthy or important." Thomas's eyes moved slowly across the room, stopping briefly on William, who couldn't meet his gaze. "My luggage was tossed carelessly. My requests were ignored. My presence in first class was questioned repeatedly." Emma's cheeks burned red with shame. "Yet others," Thomas continued, his voice warming, "showed kindness to everyone, regardless of how they looked or dressed." At the back of the room, Mary Wilson sat up straighter, not realizing Thomas was talking about her. "I'm not here to announce mass redundancies," Thomas said, and an audible sigh of relief swept through the room. "That would be easy, but not right. Instead, I'm here to announce a new direction for Britannia Airways." Robert Reed nodded encouragingly at his son from the side of the stage. "From today, this airline will focus on treating all passengers with dignity and respect. Every person who flies with us deserves our best service, regardless of their appearance, age, or background." Thomas took a small note card from his pocket. "I'd like to invite Mary Wilson to join me on stage." Heads turned to look for Mary. The senior flight attendant sat frozen in surprise as colleagues nudged her. Slowly, she stood and made her way to the stage, confusion clear on her face. "Mary doesn't remember me," Thomas said with a smile as she approached. "But I remember her. While others saw my casual clothes and made judgments, Mary treated me with the same kindness she showed to everyone." Mary's eyes widened as recognition dawned. "The young man with the magazine," she whispered. Thomas nodded. "From today, Mary will lead our new customer experience department. She embodies what this company will stand for in the future." Spontaneous applause broke out in pockets around the room, growing louder as more people joined in. Mary's eyes filled with tears as Thomas shook her hand. "But I'm just a flight attendant," she said quietly. "You're much more than that," Thomas replied, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're someone who understands that kindness matters more than status." When the applause died down, Thomas addressed the room again. "My father and I believe in second chances. Those who embrace our new values can stay and grow with the company. Those who don't will find opportunities elsewhere." In the middle of the room, William stared at his shoes. Could he change? He had worked at the airport for 15 years and had slowly grown bitter and judgmental. Now, facing the consequences of his actions, he wondered if he could learn to treat people differently. "Starting next week," Thomas continued, "we will begin a new training program for all staff. Everyone will experience what it's like to be on the receiving end of both poor and excellent service." Robert Reed stepped forward to stand beside his son. "We're not just changing a company," the elder Reed said. "We're changing a culture. It won't be easy, but it will be worth it." As the meeting ended, the staff filed out with mixed emotions. Some felt relieved, others worried, many inspired. William remained in his seat long after most had left, still staring at his shoes. "Excuse me," came a voice. William looked up to see Thomas Reed standing in front of him. William swallowed hard. "Mr. Reed, I'm sorry about your suitcase." Thomas studied the baggage handler's face. "It wasn't just about the suitcase, William." "I know," William whispered. "I was wrong about everything." Airport staff tosses Black teen's luggage, unaware he just bought the airline for 120 milles. 6 months passed quickly. The old Britannia Airways, now renamed Skyward, looked completely different. The planes had fresh blue and silver paint. The A Uniforms were new. Even the airport counters had changed to reflect the company's new values. But the biggest change was in the people. Thomas Reed sat in his office overlooking the main terminal at Heathrow. At 20, he was possibly the youngest airline executive in Britain. On his desk sat a small model plane with the new Skyward logo. Next to it was a framed photo from his first day as a passenger, wearing jeans and a simple jumper. Mary Wilson, now head of customer experience, knocked on his open door. "The latest passenger scores are in," she said with a warm smile. She handed Thomas a folder. Thomas flipped through the pages. The numbers showed record-high satisfaction rates for the third month running. Comments like, "Best service I've ever experienced," and "Finally, an airline that cares," filled the feedback forms. "This is brilliant, Mary. Your training program is working wonders." Mary shook her head. "It's your vision, Thomas. You showed us all what respect really means." After buying the airline, Thomas had personally designed the staff training program. Every employee, from pilots to cleaners, spent a week experiencing travel as different types of passengers. They traveled as elderly people, parents with young, children, business travelers, and first-time flyers. They wore simple clothes one day and expensive suits the next to feel how differently people might treat them. In the staff canteen, Thomas filled his tray with shepherd's pie and vegetables. He spotted William sitting alone at a corner table and walked over. "Mind if I join you?" he asked. William looked up, surprised. "Of course not, Mr. Reed." 6 months ago, William had nearly lost his job. The baggage handler who had tossed Thomas's suitcase could have been the first person fired. Instead, he had asked to stay and promised to change. "Mr. Reed," William said, his voice trembling slightly, "I've been wanting to apologize properly for how I treated you that day. The training program opened my eyes." Thomas put down his fork. "The measure of a person isn't never making mistakes, William. It's how they respond when faced with them." William nodded. "I've learned that now. When I was a boy, my dad lost his job because his boss didn't like his accent. I guess I started judging people by how they looked because that's how I felt judged." "And now?" Thomas asked. "Now I understand that kindness costs nothing but means everything," William replied. "Thank you for the second chance." They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes. Then Thomas asked, "How are things on the baggage team?" William smiled. "For the first time." "Much better since the new equipment arrived. The automated sorting system you designed is brilliant. Even with the broken prototype, you still found a way to help us work better." That afternoon, William worked at Terminal 3. He noticed an elderly woman struggling with 3 heavy bags near the check-in area. Without hesitation, he walked over. "May I help you with those, ma'am?" he asked politely. The woman looked up with relief. "Oh, thank you, young man. These bags seem to get heavier every year." William didn't know that the woman was Jennifer Brooks, a secret reviewer hired by aviation magazines to test airline service. She had reviewed over 50 airlines worldwide and was known for her tough standards. "Are you flying with Skyward today?" William asked, carefully placing her bags on a trolley. "Yes, to Edinburgh," she replied, watching him closely. "You've made an excellent choice," William said, not as a rehearsed line but with genuine belief. "Let me take you to our premium check-in desk. The queue is shorter there." "But I'm not flying first class," the woman objected. William smiled warmly. "At Skyward, everyone flies first class in dignity." 2 weeks later, Skyward won Best Airline for Customer Service in Europe. The review mentioned a particularly helpful baggage handler named William. In his office, Thomas showed the magazine to his father during his weekly visit. "You were right to give him a second chance," Robert said proudly. "Most people just needed the right environment to show their best selves." Thomas nodded. "The airline's profits are up 30%. Turns out treating people with respect isn't just morally right. It's good business." As his father left, Thomas looked at the photo on his desk of that first day at the airport. It reminded him of an important truth. Appearances never tell the whole story, and everyone deserves kindness. Outside, the Skyward planes took off into blue skies, carrying passengers who would be treated with respect, regardless of who they were or what they wore.